And by putting it to Mrs May that under the Tories, the NHS has endured its longest and tightest financial squeeze ever.
Well, we've been putting more money into the NHS every year since we first came into government in 2010.
But in real terms, it's been a squeeze.
What we've seen on the NHS is the pressure's growing. And I think people saw that particularly, we saw that particularly this winter, as people live longer, often with more complex conditions, of course the pressure on the NHS is growing. And that's why I'm going to be speaking about how we deal with that in a speech I'm making tomorrow.
And the NHS is now 70 years old, more or less. What are you bringing to the birthday party?
Well, the NHS, as you say, Andrew, has been there for us for 70 years. What I'm doing in the speech tomorrow, in my announcement, is actually, it's about securing its future. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, we've worked with NHS leaders. We're going to ensure there's a 10-year plan for the NHS. That'll be a plan for world-class healthcare, more doctors, more nurses. It means extra money, significantly more money going into the NHS.
How much?
Well, I'm just about to come on to that. I thought you might want to ask me that question. It means that at the end of 5 years, by 2023-24, there will be £20 billion more in real terms being spent on the NHS. Now, often figures like that, politicians quote figures like that, they don't often mean much to many people. Some people may remember seeing a figure on the side of a bus a while back of 350 million pounds a week, in cash. Well, I can tell you that what I'm announcing will mean that in 2023-24, there will be about £600 million a week in cash, more in cash, going into the NHS. Now, of course, we've got to fund that money. That will be through the Brexit dividend, the fact that we're no longer sending vast amounts of money every year to the EU once we leave the EU, and we as a country will be contributing a bit more. And in terms of the improvements we want to see improvements in the performance issues that matter to people today, A&E, waiting times, but I also want to see improved survival rates from cancer. I want to see better mental health services. And then there's one final thing, if I may, because I think it's so important. We're making the NHS our priority. We're putting this significant amount of extra money into it. We need to make sure that money is spent wisely, that it isn't wasted, that it isn't just used up on bureaucracy. And we'll be doing just that, because I want that money to be spent in the interests of patients.
I'd like to unpack all of that, if I may, and carry on, start with the money. Can you give me a percentage figure for what this means in real terms, percentage, year-by-year average increases?
Yes, I mean, it may vary a little from year to year, but it's about 3.4% average across the period. As I say, it may vary a little from year to year. And that equates to that's in real terms.
So the Institute for Fiscal Studies said very recently, meaningful progress on waiting times, staff shortages and mental health, which you've just been talking about, will need growth of around 5%, not 3.4% for the next 5 years, much less than growth of 4% a year, and the NHS will be able to do little more than tread water. So you're not giving the NHS as much as the IFS and many of the health charities still say it needs.
Well, I said earlier, Andrew, that we've been working on this with NHS leaders. And Simon Stevens, who heads NHS England, supports this. And he will now be working with clinicians, with doctors, with people in the NHS to put together the details of this 10-year plan. Now, you know, as Prime Minister, I have to look at the various issues that are raised with me. People often asking me to put more money into this, more money into that. What we're doing is saying very clearly as a government that the NHS is our priority. And it's right, because the NHS matters to people. And, you know, I'm a user of the NHS.
The historic annual increase is 3.7, so you're still below that.
We have looked carefully at what we put into the NHS to ensure that we deliver world-class healthcare. Because remember, what I want to ensure is we saw under the Labour government, under Tony Blair, there was a point where he put a lot of extra money into the NHS. Nearly half of that was not actually spent on patient care, on delivering for patients. So we need to make sure that the money we put in is being spent on delivering for patients. And I say that because I use the NHS myself. But I also, as Prime Minister, go into hospitals and I've seen the pressure that the NHS has been under. That's why it's right that we make this our priority, that we ensure that the staff in the NHS have the resources they need to deliver the health care that is right for people that we want to see.
So, for instance, in this country, we have a waiting time for cancer. Once you've been diagnosed with cancer, you should be treated within 62 days. Do you know when the last time the government met that waiting time target was?
Well, it's precisely because there have been problems in the performance that we've seen that I think it's important that we look at how we ensure that we improve performance for the future. But you mentioned the issue of cancer.
2.5 years is the answer.
You mentioned the issue of cancer. Actually, I think the figure is that there are something like 7,000 people alive today who wouldn't have been, but are alive today as a result of the improved performance in the NHS in treating cancer. And that's important. But I want to see those survival rates improve further in future.
For people at home, they hear all this about new money and new this and new plans and so forth, and they wonder, what does it mean for me? So if there's somebody with cancer who's watching this programme, worried about how long it takes to get treated, when will they start to see a change in the service as a result of the money that you're announcing today?
Well, this will be about the 10-year plan that the NHS itself will work on and put together. Because I don't think it's right for me as a politician to say, well, you've got to do this by this point and so forth. I think what we need is the doctors, the staff in the NHS to come together and to put that 10-year plan in place. But what I want to see, as I say, is those improved survival rates. I want to see, we have some fantastic hospitals up and down this country, but we don't see every hospital able to perform an operating best practice. I want to see that across the country, across England.
You mentioned the Brexit dividend a moment ago. Can I ask you straightforwardly, would you have been able to make this announcement if we were still inside the EU?
Well, we are making an announcement which has, as I say, as a country, we will be contributing a bit more, but also we will have that sum of money that is available from the European Union. But we're leaving the question as to whether I'd be sitting here and saying this if we were going to carry on in the EU. It's completely hypothetical because we're not going to carry on in the EU. People voted and we're going to get it out.
But this is from your point of view, this is a real Brexit dividend which can now be spent on the NHS.
Yes, and I look at it in very simple terms. At the moment, as a member of the European Union, every year we send significant amounts of money spend significant amounts of money on our subscription, if you like, to the EU. When we leave, we won't be doing that.
So the question is timing,
It's right that we use that money. It's right that we use that money to spend on our priorities, and the NHS is our number one priority.
Absolutely, but the question is timing, because you are spending, if I may say so, more than £40 billion of our money on the price of leaving the EU, and that's money that's going out of this country. So the question is, at what point does the tap reverse, as it were, and we start to get a net income flowing in? Because, you're announcing this money now, but there's no Brexit income yet, is there?
Well, we haven't left the EU yet, and we'll be leaving the EU on the 29th of March 2019. As you know, there'll then be an implementation period to end December 2020. The figure that you quote about the amount of money that's was agreed last December as the financial settlement is about money that is part of what we would have been paying we signed up to the EU to pay over a particular period of time, because I said to the other leaders that for this budget plan period in the European Union, which ends in 2020, actually they shouldn't worry that our leaving was going to cause them to have to pay more or see less. So after 2020,
the money will start to flow back in the other direction.
Well,
that is the clarification.
The timing, one of the issues that was left open when we agreed the sum was the timing. There's a certain expectation over the time profile of that spending.
A certain number of crossed fingers in all of this.
It's not crossed fingers. These will be issues that will be finalised when we put the actual withdrawal agreement together into a legal treaty.
And you've also said several times that the rest of us, as it were, will have to make our contribution to this payment as well. It's been suggested this will be done through some general tax rise, either through freezing tax thresholds or something like that. Will it also require extra borrowing?
Well, if you look at what we've been able to do as a country so far in terms of putting more money into the NHS, because we've taken a balanced approach in our economy, we've been able to do that. As we look to the future, as I say, there will be this Brexit dividend. We will be contributing more as a country, but there are many aspects that, and the Chancellor will announce the details in due course and before the spending review. But there are many aspects, of course, that will change over the next few months potentially. in terms of we'll be looking at economic growth and at other issues.
All right. The other big part of this, something that you got into a bit of trouble with during the election campaign, is social care. I mean, it's been suggested that we have to spend more money on social care and have to find a new way of funding social care. And after the election, you said you were onto that. How close have you got to an answer?
Well, we'll be publishing a green paper in due course on social care, but it is absolutely right that we must recognise the impact that social care has on the NHS and the way in which these work together. And I'm very clear that we need to ensure that in dealing with social care, it doesn't put added pressures onto the NHS. Indeed. We want to see this long-term plan for the NHS delivering for the NHS.
And but to be absolutely clear on that, if I may just for a second, is any of the money that you're announcing now for the NHS for social care, or is that a completely separate issue?
This is money for the NHS. So we will address the social care issue. We'll publish a green paper on social care. We've actually already, as the Chancellor announced last year, put £2 billion extra into social care because we've seen the need there and we've put more money into it.
Because your social care minister says, like, putting money into the NHS, very, very welcome, but it's a bit like running a bath with the taps full on and the plug out if you don't do social care as well.
Well, of course there's a link between social care and health. Why did I put social care, responsibility for social care, into the Department of Health after the last election? Precisely because I recognise that these need to work together. Of course, they work, people see it, what people see, where they see the sort of rub up between social care and health, is about elderly people often kept in hospital longer than they need to be because there isn't the place perhaps in a care home available for them. We need to be addressing these issues, but the money I'm announcing, the £20 billion in real terms more in 2023-24 going into the NHS is for the NHS.
Do you think the fact that you had to deal with your diabetes in the NHS predisposed you to be more willing to spend this kind of money?
Well, as an MP and as an MP before I was diagnosed with diabetes, of course I used the NHS, I saw the NHS. But I think as a type 1 diabetic, at the time when I was diagnosed, I very much felt the NHS was there for me. Because when you get something like that, a diagnosis like that, you immediately think, well, how am I going to deal with it? How will I cope with it? And I've had fantastic support from my local GP's practice, from my consultant, and also from the specialists, the clinical specialist nurses who are there, who can advise you and help you. And I've really seen what the NHS means to somebody. Not just, on the odd day, but actually, for me, it's day by day.
Can I turn to another issue on your plate and ask you, first of all, are you a woman of your word?
Yes, I am, Andrew. And I suspect I know what the second question is going to be.
The reason I'm asking that so bluntly is that a lot of your MPs this weekend wonder about that because they thought they had had a private meeting with you. You were about to lose a vote. It seems you might lose a vote on the floor of the House of Commons on the withdrawal bill, and you brought in a group of Tory rebels and you told them that you were going to give them a certain kind of support, and then afterwards they think you changed your mind, you broke your word.
What I did talk to people. Let's just, if I can just set the context for this. The EU withdrawal bill is an important bill. It is part of the legislation we need in order to be able to leave the European Union. And we're leaving the European Union because Parliament asked the British people what their choice was, and they clearly chose that we should leave the European Union, and we're going to deliver on that. But as we put the bill through, there were some concerns expressed about the particular role of Parliament in the future. I did indeed meet a group of my fellow MPs. I listened to their concerns and I undertook to consider their concerns. And the next day I stood up in Prime Minister's questions and said I'd put an amendment down in the House of Lords. I've done exactly that.
Well,
but if I may, what's important about this is that we recognise the concerns that people have about the role of Parliament. But there are two things I'm also very clear about, which is, first of all, that Parliament cannot tie the hands of government in negotiations. If you think about it, as we're sitting there negotiating on the details of our future relationship or our withdrawal agreement, we can't have a situation where every time we have to take a decision, we have to go back and have a lengthy debate. And Parliament can't tie government's hands in negotiations. But it's also important that Parliament cannot and should not overturn the will of the British people, which was to leave the EU.
Can I put it as it's seen by the people on the other side of this argument, which is that this only happens in the event of no deal, which you don't want, not many people want a no deal, and it would be a solemn, difficult moment possibly for the country if that happened. And they say that Parliament, as our sovereign legislative and decision-making body, ought to have, as it were, a hand on the wheel or some sense of guiding the country about what happens next, and that your amendment doesn't allow them really to do that, and their amendment did. And therefore it is about the centrality of Parliament. And after all, this is all about reclaiming sovereignty of Parliament.
Well, it is, and Parliament is, we've always said that Parliament was going to be able to express its view on this issue, to have a meaningful vote on this issue. There's a debate about what those words mean. I've listened carefully to the concerns. I've put an amendment down that I think balances this issue of the role of Parliament together with the need for us to ensure that we don't overturn the decision of the British people. But what we're talking about here, Andrew, if you just think about it, we've just spent some time talking about a really significant announcement about the future of our National Health Service, which matters to people in this country on a day-to-day basis. What we're now discussing is whether a particular motion in the House of Commons should be amendable or unamendable.
Well, that's the other side of this.
That's what I'm clear about is that we need to recognise the role of Parliament, but ensure that government's hands can't be tied in negotiations, and that Parliament does not overturn the will of the people.
Because on the other side of the argument, as it were, the ardent Brexiteers fear that bit by bit, compromise by compromise, kind of prevarication by prevarication, with lots and lots of clever, complicated language and great complexity, we are being drawn into a relationship with the EU so that we do leave legally, but actually we don't really leave. You know, we're close to we're inside or close to the customs union, we're very close to the single market, and in effect, we haven't really left.
Well, first of all, we're not going to be inside the customs union. I've said that on a number of occasions. I'm happy to repeat it now. But what do we need to ensure when we leave the European Union that we have? We want to continue to have a really good trading relationship with the European Union, and customs is part of that, but there are other issues that will be part of that as well. But we want to make sure that we've got an independent trade policy so we can negotiate trade deals around the rest of the world. There's some other aspects where we will continue to work with the European Union. There is a sense that
we're getting stuck, we're getting ground down. They are being tougher and tougher day by day, week by week, as they see drift and division at Westminster.
No, what we see happening, and let me just sort of, if we step back, Andrew, I have to say that before December, when we were coming to the council meeting that was looking at moving on in our considerations, in our talks with the EU, there was a lot of scepticism about, oh, you're not going to get a deal there, you're not going to get an agreement. We got it. Yeah. Similarly, before March, everybody said, oh, you're not going to get agreement on the implementation period. We got it. We got it because we've been sitting down and negotiating in British interests, and that was important for business and it was important for citizens.
You can say clearly...
Negotiations are continuing at the moment. You know, I can set your mind at rest. Well, if you think nothing is happening, don't worry. There's lots of negotiation continuing.
It's not my mind you need to worry about.
We're being clear about our position.
It's the Foreign Secretary's mind. And he says there is a risk that we will be locked in orbit around the EU and the customs union, and to a large extent still in the single market, so not really having full freedom on our trade policy, our tariff schedules, or indeed our regulatory framework either. That's what he fears. What's your message to him?
Well, the message is, as government has agreed that we will have an independent trade policy, we will be free to negotiate those trade deals around the rest of the world. But it isn't a case of replacing everything we've done with the EU with trade with the rest of the world. It's about adding to the trade we have with the EU. It's about making sure we can take advantage of that independent trade policy, of being outside the EU. So a good relationship with the EU, and we will be continuing to cooperate with countries in Europe, because we're leaving the EU, we're not leaving Europe. But also this gives us opportunities for the future. There's I believe, a real bright future for the UK outside the European Union, and it's this government that's going to deliver it.
How important is it to you that there is no friction-driven border between the two parts of Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic?
It is important for the people of Northern Ireland that we do not see a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. The way I would put it, it's about people being able to lead their lives, carry on leading their lives as they do today. But can I just explain why? It's about people. But it's also really important about the United Kingdom and about this government working for all parts of the United Kingdom. What we've seen from the European Commission are some ideas, one idea in particular, that would effectively put a border down which would separate off Northern Ireland from Great Britain.
That's not acceptable.
Right. That's not acceptable.
And
We're
it's
one
not acceptable
united
to have a hard
kingdom.
border on the island of Ireland either, you've said.
Yes,
that's crucial.
Absolutely. We're committed.
Again, your Foreign Secretary says this is allowing the tail to wag the dog. And he says it's absurd, beyond belief, that we're allowing the tail to wag the dog in this way. We're allowing the whole of our agenda to be dictated by this folly. That's your Foreign Secretary.
The issue of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland is an important element in the talks that we're undertaking with the European Union. But of course it is one part of a very big picture, because as a country we're ambitious for the partnership that we can develop with the European Union on the economy. Most focus is on the economy, but also on security matters as well. Yeah. We want to be able to continue to cooperate with countries inside Europe in the best interests of the UK. And I think the cooperation in the best interests of the UK will also be in the interests of the EU.
But they're not behaving like that, are they? Not when it comes to Galileo, not when it comes to the passport issue for criminals and so forth. They see a Prime Minister who is caught between different Tory factions, and you're kind of frozen between the hard Brexiteers and the soft Brexiteers, and you're trying to placate one group and then the other group, and therefore they think they can take you for a fool, really, in the end.
No, Andrew, that's not right at all. Let's just look at Galileo. Because this is an issue. It's about the future elements in terms of security for the future. The UK has been contributing significantly to the Galileo programme so far. Yes, the EU are saying that they don't think in the future, as not being a member of the EU, we can continue to contribute and have the access that we would have as a member of the EU. We're still discussing that with them. But what I have said, what we as a government have said, what we've been very clear about to them is that may be your decision. If that is, we'll still discuss it. But if it is your decision, then we will ensure that we have what Britain needs, and we will do it ourselves.
When it comes to all of these issues, again, your Foreign Secretary has said you need a different tone. You need to be more combative. You've been described famously by Ken Clarke as a bloody difficult woman. And the question is, are you being difficult enough when it comes to the EU? Do we need a change of tone? Is it time to play hardball?
It is time to ensure that we get on with the complicated, intricate job of actually sitting down and working through all the various issues we need to work through. I've been clear that we are going to have, what we're going to do is in the week beginning the 9th of July, we'll publish a white paper which will set out in more detail than the speeches any of us have given. I've given speeches, David Davis has, Philip Hammond, Liam Fox on these issues. We'll set out in more detail the ambition we have for the relationship with the European Union in future. But can I just say this? We've reached the agreements we've reached so far in December and in March by the UK being very clear about where its interests lay and ensuring that those decisions reflect UK interests. And the deal that I want to negotiate will be a deal that will be good for Britain.
When Jeremy Corbyn again quoted the Foreign Secretary at you saying you should be more like Trump, you kind of froze and you gave him the death stare. What was going through your mind at that moment?
Well, you know, lots of people, somebody else actually yesterday talked to me about this thing they call the sort of death stare. I'm not really conscious that I'm doing it at the time.
But you were very cross, weren't you?
What was going through my mind was that actually I don't think Jeremy Corbyn understands what these negotiations are really about. I don't think... You remember Jeremy Corbyn is the man who said we should trigger Article 50 immediately after the referendum vote, when no preparation had been made for the discussions for the negotiations. Nobody had done work on what the issues that needed to be addressed. We have been ensuring that we do the job for the British people. We're leaving the EU, but we're going to make sure we get a good deal.
Just one final question, if I may, one final area, which is, why do you think it is possible for a Conservative MP to stop a law going through the House of Commons that would have banned men taking photographs up women's skirts? Why did that happen?
Well, first of all, I think that upskirting it's invasive, it's degrading, it's offensive. And what I'm going to do in response to what happened is to ensure that that bill was blocked. We're going to take the bill that was blocked, the legislation that was blocked, and we're going to put it through in government time.
Some people won't know who Christopher Chope is. He's blocked bills to pardon Alan Turing. He's blocked a bill to prevent revenge evictions, to ban wild animals in circus,